This is the 46 of 46 podcast summit session, where we'll talk all things Adirondack, backcountry, and beyond. From high peak stories and adventures to trail tips and tricks, we'll dive deep into the heart of these mountains and the people who passionately climb them. Adirondack maps and spruce traps to bushwhacks and backpacks. It's all here on the 46 of 46 summit sessions. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Summit Sessions here on the 46 of 46 podcast. This is part 2 of Will Robinson's Northeast 115 Thru-Hike. Last week, we heard the story starting in the Catskills, onto the Adirondack Park, where he hiked all 46 high peaks, and then he went to Crown Point over the bridge to start the Vermont portion. Now we're going to hear about Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, so let's get right back to it. All right, so you just did your third round of the 46 then at this point.
Yeah.
And you finished on the Dix Range, okay.
Yeah.
So now you have to get to Crown Point, and we're going to venture outside the blue line now. Let's go. Take us through it. You got to get to Vermont now.
Yeah, so get into the Crown Point Bridge. Pretty boring there. It's all road walking again. But it had something I was really looking forward to. My mom, throughout all of this so far, she's told me that she wanted to walk across the Crown Point Bridge with me from New York to Vermont, and she's calling this Bridge Day, and she's just so excited about it. She's like planning it out, and it's like, in my mind, there's not much to plan out, but she's like, I've been thinking about it. I've been talking to my sister about it. I think that I should like start on this side and walk over to you, and then we'll walk back to my car, but maybe we should do this other way. I'm like, Mom, just
I love it
doesn't
though.
have that much, but I love how invested she was.
Oh, I love how invested she is. You know, that is a quality mother who is so invested in what her children are doing and wants to be a part of it and wants to do her part and be. I love it, Mom. Great job. That's fantastic.
So supportive throughout
yes, I love it.
Entire project. So my grandparents ended up coming as well, and it's just great to see all of them. We crossed the bridge, and it's just like it felt really good to finally cross a state line. Because I had been in New York for so long.
Sure.
And I know that like most of your listeners are fans of the Adirondacks mostly, but like it did feel pretty good to leave the Adirondacks.
Hey, totally get it. Totally get it. And everybody from Robinson Lane showed up. So that's a good time then.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. So all right. So you walk 1,000,000 miles to get to the Crown Point Bridge because I mean, you would go. So then you would have gone back to like the Elizabethtown area and then all the way to Crown Point, which is just so far. And then that would have been I assume multiple days between the Dix Range and like getting to the bridge before Bridge Day.
Actually, from the Dix Range to Underhill State Park, I have it down as only 3 days. That would have been around 90 miles.
Only 3 days. It's just so wild. Like for you, I mean, yeah, you did this for 2 months, but I'm like, dude, it took you 3 days. That's a big chunk of a life. That's half a week right there. But we have different perspectives, obviously. But yeah, that sounds about right. And you probably could have got some Chinese food in Crown Point, as I know they have a Chinese restaurant there. I don't know if you did, but
you're telling me this now?
That would have been a good refuel for you there. Yeah. But all right, so Bridge Day. So take us to Bridge Day. You must have met Mom on the New York side and walked over.
And had some good food. We hung out for a little while at a parking lot. And then since she lives pretty close to the bridge, and like throughout my road walk from the Crown Point Bridge to Underhill State Park, I stayed the night at her house 2 nights, maybe. I don't remember exactly. But so I had a little bit of luxury there, which I was very thankful for. And that's when torrential rain started. Yeah.
And it just never stopped until you
just
finished.
About.
Yeah.
So I got, I'm trying to remember exactly how this worked out. So I was road walking towards Richmond, Vermont. And that's when I come across this river just running through and over the road I needed to walk over. And there's just as far as I knew, no way around it. It was not anywhere safe to cross it. Like it would just been like a death wish to try to cross this river. And so I called my mom. I'm like, well, I've only done like 15 miles or whatever today, but can you come pick me up? And she was like, well, I'm busy right now, but in about an hour I can come and get you. Okay, great. I have literally nothing else to do. Like I can just sit here and I don't care. Like whatever. This has ruined my day, but I've nothing else to do, so might as well wait.
That's it. And
while I'm waiting, I hear these people talking. They're locals. They're talking about a detour, and I'm like, oh. I walk over to them. I'm like, tell me more. And so they explained the detour to me, and it was a road that I had walked by previously, and I thought to myself, this is basically like if I had walked into a town gotten like food or something, like gotten a resupply, I would have felt totally fine hitching back to where I got off of my route or whatever. And people might question this, but I have no guilt or regret about this. So I took a hitch back to the spot of the road where I had made the one turn, and then the detour was there also. So I got my ride back there, saved me some time, but I had like still covered the footsteps.
Very good.
Yeah. And then after that, I didn't have much issue with the flooding, other than the day I got on the long trail was the same day that the GMC, the Green Mountain Club, basically said, we don't know what trail conditions are like, so we recommend you getting off the trail. They never actually closed the long trail, so I, again, don't feel guilty about being on the trail, other than I do recognize that I was being selfish and irresponsible by putting myself at risk, and then, which would have then, if I had an issue, put more pressure or weight on emergency personnel that are already busy elsewhere. And I want to recognize that. And it's not something I'm proud of necessarily, but it's something I did, and I will admit to it.
Had to do it to get, to do what you were out there to do. Totally understand, totally get it. And thankfully it all worked out just fine.
Yeah. And it turns out the long trail was in really good shape still for the most part.
Perfect.
I shout out to the Green Mountain Club for building such a good trail. Occasionally it would be like a river for 5 feet, and then it would diverge off because it was just built that way, and it would be dry trail again, or dry-ish, as dry as the long trail gets, as dry as Vermont gets. But the downside to all of this was another point in my hike where I was looking forward to having company, having thru-hikers, having that community.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't see many people. Because I know, like, when I hiked in 21, like, there's so many people in the long trail. I was like, I'm going to see all these people. I'm going to be with thru-hikers. I'm going to be at camp with people. We're going to tell stories. It's going to be great. And then there was none of that. I think every night at camp I was by myself.
Sucks.
That was tough.
Yeah. I mean, what day was it that you got into Vermont? What day into the hike was Bridge Day?
Bridge Day was day 23, and then I got on to Mansfield on day 26.
Okay. All right. So so you're almost a month in. I mean, you're almost halfway. I mean, you're almost halfway on this journey.
Yeah,
realistically.
I don't know if at the time it felt that way.
I bet it didn't, because you still had a lot of mountains to go.
Yeah.
But you also had already done a lot. So you did have momentum, and you had already, you already hiked the 46 high peaks. Like, it's not like you were just starting out either. You're like, you are in the thick of it.
Mm-hmm. And at this point, my body's feeling better. I had put behind me what I told myself was going to be the hardest part of the hike, the crux of the route, the Adirondacks. So that did feel really good to get them behind me. And just like, okay, if I can do those, I can probably do the rest, but it's going to be a long journey. It's going to be a wet one.
It will be. And it was.
Yeah. So in Vermont, once I hit Mansfield, it was long trail, basically all the way to Killington. I did one day, just again, for the sake of transparency, like, I didn't follow the long trail the entire way, but I had continuous footsteps. I was at my shelter before the day of hitting Killington, and it was just thunder, lightning, raining so hard that morning. And I was like, I don't really want to walk on trail right now. It's going to be miserable. And so I was like, there's a road and a mile from my shelter, and I can take that road into whatever town. And then my plan was to stay at the Long Trail Inn that night. I was like, if weather changes, I'll hit Killington. I don't expect that to happen. I expect it to be a shorter day. So I take the road. It turns out to be a fine day after the morning. Like, it was horrible conditions in the morning, clears up. And then I hit Killington, stay at the Long Trail Inn, and continue on from there. But I just like to admit to those small things. Like, it's still a continuous footpath, but it's not what I planned.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. But yeah, once I get to the junction from the Long Trail and the AT, and I head towards New Hampshire, trail conditions got even better, and I just felt like I was able to cruise. And that felt really nice to have, like, my body just felt stronger, and so get some good miles in.
Very nice. So how are you feeling mentally? I know obviously mentally we know, like, you're feeling lonely and this and that. How are you feeling mentally and physically as you are making your way through Vermont?
Going through Vermont, I felt good physically. And if it wasn't for the rain, I think I would have felt good mentally as well.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But the rain just had me totally down.
And it's not even just like, rain. It's like, it was an absurd amount of rain this summer. It's like,
yes,
I wasn't even out there with you. And I was just like, dude, can we just catch a break now of the rain, let alone if I was out there on the trail the whole time. I can't even imagine, quite frankly, what I would feel like.
But one thing I was just noticed throughout the entire hike was how I could be totally beat at the end of the day. Just like, can't hike another mile. Just getting that one night's rest, I was fresh the next morning. I didn't really want to get up. I didn't want to go do it all again, but my body was ready to, which was nice. I appreciate the body.
Oh, dude, our bodies are able to do such amazing things when our mind tells us, well, we tell ourselves that we can do things, and we can keep pushing, and we can keep going another step, and then another step, and another step. It's amazing what we'll end up accomplishing. And it always amazes me when I hear of other people doing the same thing. It's awesome stuff. So at some point, though, there's got to be a point into this journey where you have like a big morale boost. I would have to think it would have been somewhere in Vermont, because it's like it's your home state. You're confident moving forward, but there's got to be a point where you have a big pick me up. What would you
coming soon?
Okay, it's coming. I know it's got to be coming, because it's been a tough journey since day one so far. So I'm just thinking, there's got to be a point where we have a big boost, because otherwise it's just like you can't be hammered down, day after day after day, and or you're just like an absolute monster of perseverance. But even though you are still, but yeah. All right, continue.
Yeah, I think Vermont would have been that morale boost if it hadn't been for the torrential flooding rain that we had.
Yeah.
But so I do remember getting on. How familiar are you with the New Hampshire 48?
Not very familiar at all.
Not very. Okay.
Many of my listeners are, though, so they'll enjoy this stretch for sure.
So I got onto Mount Moosilauke. As much as I hike over there, people say different things, and I don't know how exactly it's pronounced. Doesn't matter. People know what I'm talking about. That's the first hike, the first mountain that I would hit in New Hampshire, and the first 4,000 footer. And it's another one that holds a special spot to me, because I finished my single season winter 48 on it. It's a beautiful mountain. It's wonderful. And so I crested towards the summit. I was just like, I feel at home. This is just like, finally, this is where I should be. And as much as like I grew up in Vermont, I live here now, I felt more at home when I was on Mount Moosilauke than when I was in Vermont on the hike. And so at that point, things started getting better for me, and they continued to get better. I was able to spend a few nights at the Notch Hostel in Lincoln, New Hampshire, where I have some friends that were working. And that was where I was able to see some Appalachian Trail through hikers as well. At that point, I had been hiking with AT through hikers for a little while, actually, but just having like that experience at the hostel with them was really nice. Because I was on the AT from the junction of Long Trail and AT up until I hit Franconia Ridge, and then I was on and off it a bit. So I had that through hiker community that I had been wanting for the longest time.
What was the general consensus like when you would have conversations with these AT through hikers, knowing like when you would tell them what you're doing and it's obviously this totally different type of vibe? Was there like a holy crap, that's amazing? Or was it like, I'm not impressed? Like what was the vibe from those hikers?
Nobody understood what I was doing.
Yeah. And they probably
they're from all over the,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I'd say they probably didn't fathom it, didn't understand, didn't care.
Yeah.
It's not the AT. So, AT or bust in a lot of these people's minds. But
I don't think they had that. Most of them didn't have that thought process. They still considered me a through hiker. They just knew I was doing a different through hike. But because they're from all over the country and some of them all over the world that I met, they just weren't familiar with what the 115 was. Yeah. And I would do my best to explain, like, so you're hiking a lot of these mountains in New Hampshire. They're 4,000 foot mountains, and there's even more of them. And so I'm just going up and down these giant mountains every day.
Yep.
And they respected what I was doing, but they didn't understand it.
Makes sense.
Sometimes if it was like a passerby that I wasn't going to spend more time with, they would just be like, "Oh, Bo, you're northbound." And if I didn't have the energy or time to explain it, I'd be like, "Yep."
Yeah, totally get it. Makes perfect sense. Easy to just say, yes, that's what I'm doing. All right, cool. So when you got to New Hampshire, so you mentioned you kind of felt more at home and, whatnot in New Hampshire. When you, what was your mindset when you crossed out of Vermont? So now you're going into your third state. How did that feel?
I don't specifically remember how I was feeling at that moment, but it must have felt pretty good. And I think what really I remember is being on Moosilauke. That's when I really remember the change happening. But it must have still felt pretty good leaving Vermont.
Yep.
There's another state behind me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did realize that my support system was going to change a bit at that point, because my mom was heading on vacation. And so she would still be there like via text and phone, but I wasn't going to have that same resupply option and whatnot. There's a lot, almost all of my resupplies for this entire trip were from friends and family, which I was very fortunate for. Like, I didn't have to hitchhike into towns. I didn't have to do mail drops. I just had a lot of people willing to support me.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's a team effort. Effort. So you start making your way through New Hampshire, and with the 48, you have lots of road walking as well. Lots of road walking. Not
too much.
I feel like from my experience, like looking at the maps and the 48, like I guess you could through hike anything, obviously. Case in point, our podcast. But I feel like there's still going to be a decent amount of road walking throughout the 48.
I had probably mostly they're small chunks. I think the longest chunk of the Diaretisma itself, so that's like first Moosilauke all the way to Cabot, which is the last one that I hit. So in that chunk of it, the longest road walk was like 15 miles maybe. Which to me at this point is not a lot. To a lot of people,
to me, I feel like that's still like that's a lot of road. That's a long chunk of time.
Yeah, we definitely both have different perspectives. I think me and most other people have different perspectives. Like most people are not going to agree that's only 15 miles. They're like, "Well, you're crazy. That's a lot of miles."
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah, so to some people, there are a lot of miles of road walking.
Yeah, and you must have gotten pretty. So at this point too, like you're pretty good at this. You're pretty good at camping along the side of the road too. So that's a new skill set you have in your back pocket now for when when you need to.
After leaving Vermont, actually after getting to Underhill, I didn't have to camp on the side of the road at all anymore. I was able to camp in the woods, which was good. Like on trail, which was good.
All right. So how did New Hampshire go? Let's take us through it. What were you feeling? Did you have any moments where this sucks, this is awesome, this hurts, I'm going home, I'm peeing blood again? How do we do?
New Hampshire was really kind to me. I had really good weather during that section. And like I said, I know a lot of people over there, or maybe I didn't touch on that too much, but I do know a lot of people over there. A lot of good connections that were able to come out just to say hi, or to do it overnight with me, hike a few miles. And then my friend Philip, he kind of blew up my Instagram one point, and I got a whole bunch of new followers, which I'm not one necessarily to care about followers too much, but it was really cool after that, because most of those people were local to New Hampshire and hiked there a lot. I would, every day after that, basically in New Hampshire, had somebody that recognized me, and they're like, "Hey, I know who you are. I know what you're doing." And that sounds creepy actually when I say that, but it was really cool having those people that really care about the project and know what's happening, and they're willing to talk about it. They want to talk about it. That was just a morale boost each time. I love the mountains in New Hampshire, so just being there was great in general. It was definitely hard just because they're hard mountains. It's a hard thing that I'm doing. But morale was super high through all of New Hampshire, if I remember correctly.
And was your body feeling, were you, in playing shape at this point, or were you, kind of getting run down? How was that part of the equation?
I was feeling really strong until I resupplied with my friend Joe, the one that pushed me to do all these crazy things, basically. And she commented on how heavy my resupply was and how much food I had. And at that point, it was my pack had been that heavy previously, but it was, for some reason, it felt heavier after hearing that. And I was just oh, my pack's so heavy. I'm climbing these big mountains. And it's just for some reason, things felt a little harder for a little while after that, until I was well, no, nothing's changed.
Yeah. She put those thoughts in your head. Come
exactly.
on, Joe.
So much of this stuff is mental.
Oh yeah. Big time.
I was luckily able to get some decent days for the presidential range, which the Prezzies are known for literally the worst weather in the world, the highest wind speed ever recorded and whatnot. Weather can change in an instant. So thankfully I had some pretty good weather for that. There was one mountain on it that I had this uncomfortable experience, is Mount Madison. The Prezzies I had to break up into 2 days. It's just how the Diartismo works. You don't do a full presidential traverse. You break it up. And so I'm on Mount Madison, and the wind is probably 60 plus miles per hour. It's cold. I've now put 2 pairs of Darn Tough socks on my hands to try to keep them warm. But other than that, I got really lucky for the presidentials.
All right, we'll take it. Yeah. Now, you mentioned a resupply just now. What type of food? We haven't even talked about this at all. What type of food were you eating throughout the whole journey? But what's kind of your typical? What did the food look like typically day to day?
Yep, that's a wonderful question. So in the morning, it would be 2 packages of Pop-Tarts. It started out as just 1 package, and that was just not nearly enough. And then throughout the day, I would eat 9 Nature Valley, sweet and savory granola bars, and 10 packages of Welch's fruit snacks. I'm a bit obsessed with Welch's fruit snacks, and I had bothered them on Instagram enough that they sent me 4 large boxes, a little backpack, a water bottle, and other miscellaneous merch.
Oh, I love it.
So
good for
shout
you.
out to Welch's fruit snacks.
All right. This episode is brought to you by Welch's.
The dream is to get a sponsorship someday. So 10 packages of Welch's fruit snacks. And then for lunch, I would have 2 peanut butter tortillas. So nothing fancy there by any means, but they got the calories, a little protein in. And for other snacks throughout the day, I'd have this big Ziploc bag full of a mix of Wheat Thins, M&Ms, Craisins, and mixed nuts. And then dinner was 2 packages of pasta sides with 2 packages of tuna. I like the pasta sides because the package has a metallic liner that you can just pour boiling water into and cook it in there and save having to wash the pot, because my least favorite chore is washing the pot.
I hear you there.
And that did have to change every once in a while. It's the daily intake, depending on what I could find at certain stores And like when you get to Maine, after Rangeley on the AT, there's not really great grocery stores, and the hostels end up being your resupply locations. They have little resupply stores in them, and like they have enough for you. They don't necessarily have the variety. So I didn't get to be as picky then.
Mm-hmm. All right. So that's kind of like your typical day in terms of nutrition.
Right. And so it's a lot of junk, and it was probably around 5,000 calories a day. And through hikers basically are all about get the calories in. Doesn't really matter how you get them in. Mm-hmm. One thing that I should know is once I started having the quad issues and the peeing blood, I did start taking a multivitamin, which I think was a good choice.
Very good. Very good. Mm-hmm. Got to do what you got to do. Got to have it.
Yeah.
All right. So continue on the New Hampshire journey here.
Yeah. So should I continue doing kind of step by step like we did the Adirondacks, or
let's do it. Let's get the whole story out. Let's hear it.
So we just left off where I had gone to the Notch Hostel, and I had a great time there. And then it was Franconia Ridge, which is one of the most notable ridges in the White Mountains, just very photographed, for kind of like a cliche location. Hike that, and I'm just trying to find on my map real quick. I was still on the Adirondacks. I have to move over. And then not everything's, I'm not necessarily going to go mountain by mountain, but if I find something notable, I will touch on that.
Sure. You're telling the story. Just take us through the important things that you wanted to touch on.
Yeah. So it's Franconia Ridge over to Garfield, and then down to 13 Falls campsite, where I decided to do a bushwhack up to the back of Owl's Head, which is another 4,000 footer over there. And it saved me a few miles, and it's a bushwhack I had done before on the Diaretisma back in 2020. But this time when I did it, it was not nearly as easy. The first time that I did it, we just chose a better route, I guess, because there really isn't, like, a lot of bushwhacks that I've done, they kind of like have a little hard path to them just because they've been done so often.
Sure.
This one has none of that, and I just went through some of the like densest trees that I've ever bushwhacked through. It was just a miserable experience. When I got to the top, I was really debating just going down the regular trail, but I was like, extra miles. I'm not doing extra miles.
Yeah.
So I get to 13 Falls again after bushwhacking back down, spend the night there. And then what's the next notable thing? I push over the Galehead Twins, Hale, Zealand, and nothing really notable until I guess I get to Giu, and I have a friend come and join me. We go up on West Bond together. She brought me some mixed fruit, and it was just nice to see a friendly face. And I have my first interaction with an AT through hiker that will end up being a bigger part of the story later on. By this time, I didn't know it. There was this guy at Giu, his name was Animal, and he was just talking all night to the people there, staying the night. Everybody wanted to hear everything about the AT, and I never told Animal this, and I kind of hope he's listening to this at some point, but I thought he was the most annoying person that I've ever met, basically. And not that I ever met, but I was just, hiker midnight is usually like 8 o'clock, and he's out there talking until like 9 or 9:30, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I want to sleep. Turns out he also didn't want to be talking that late. Later I find out that he felt like he had to be up because all those people are still asking him questions. But we'll touch base on running into him again later. And then do the Bonds and take an abandoned trail a little while after that over to the Hancocks, do a fun little river crossing, which was, at the time, I thought it was a notable river crossing. Once I got to Maine, I realized that what I thought was a notable river crossing, actually nothing. Let's see. I'm realizing now that as much as I enjoyed New Hampshire, because it wasn't that challenging, it's making for not a very great storytelling experience. Like it all went so easy breezy.
Yeah, sure. It was business as usual. I mean, you've been there so many times, and no, that's good though. I mean, you need that, I mean, throughout the course of this entire journey, you need some wins. You need some, it can't all be just doom and gloom, pound you into the ground, so it's like, it's good that you had, you can build some more momentum, and especially going into the final portion of the hike.
Right. So I'm going to skip over a few mountains here. Like I was all of in between this would have just been like, I did this mountain and then this one and then this one and then this one. But so I get to the Tri-Pyramids, and I had never, so the Tri-Pyramids are somewhat well known for the slide trails that they have. It's not like a requirement to do the slide to get to the summit. There's alternative trails. And I'd always done the alternative trails. I'd never done either of the slides. And I was like, well, the slide saves some miles. And I don't know what I was thinking. Like I knew deep down that it wasn't going to be faster, but I was like, oh, might as well give the slide a try with the full pack. And I can't remember, I think it was the North Tri-Pyramid slide that I went up, but now it's either north or south, doesn't matter too much. Like I said, I don't know the geography very well of any of these areas, even though I hike them all the time. And oh my God, it was so slow, and I regretted it so much. Anywho, when I got at that point, I met up with a friend that hiked for a little while for me, which was nice. And just whenever a friend came out with me, it really boosted morale. And I just was so thankful for everybody that made the time to come see me and hike with me, or even come say hi.
Did you have friends going for days at a time, or for like day hikes?
Day hikes, yeah. Okay. I had one friend that did an overnight with me. But yeah, that was about it. It was mostly just short little day hikes, which is still very much appreciated.
Oh, definitely.
Let's see. Nothing notable here. We talked about the Prezzies already, and briefly, and I don't have much else to share with those, I guess.
Any more physical, limitations, physical, bumps and bruises showing up at this point in the stretch?
At this point, my body is doing amazing. Great. And that just felt so good, one, physically and mentally, just being like, wow, that stuff's in the past. At this point, I've also stopped doing my stretching and exercising each night, which I probably could have continued, but it was when I got to camp each night, like as much as I wasn't feeling any major pains, I was still exhausted. Like I said, hiker midnights around 8 usually. I was some days getting to camp at like 4:30 because I start early, I hike fast, I get to camp early. I could push on longer, do bigger miles, but to me, it's worth getting that rest time. So I'd get to camp at say 4:30 sometimes. I would then do my little chores I need to do and be asleep by like 6. I would then probably sleep until like 9, and then I'd wake up for a minute and be like, that was a nice little nap. And I'd fall right back asleep until like 5:30 the next morning. So I slept a lot on this hike.
That's great. You need it.
A major reason. Yeah.
I mean, it's so long, and you're doing such big miles every day. And these also aren't just backpacking miles. You're going up mountains and down mountains. You're climbing lots of elevation, and you have that pack on while going up these mountains. So it's an important part of the equation for sure.
So I guess I was just going through the map, and like nothing really notable happened until I guess the last day in the Diartisma, and it's only notable really because it's the last day. But that was Wombeck and then Cabot, which I don't remember this section of trail being so miserable the first time I did it. I think I've actually done this section of trail twice before this, so I've done it 3 times, but it was just so overgrown, and I was not having a good time. This was the second time in my Thru-Hike where I put in headphones. The first time was a horribly rainy day on a road walk. And I just put the headphones, listened to some music, and that got me through the rough section of trail. And I got to Cabot, and I was curious how I was going to feel when I got there, because the first time I finished the Diartisma, like it felt amazing. I felt so good about myself. And I think part of that was had the company of good friends. I'd hiked out with somebody else. I really shared that experience with someone, which I'm finding enhances experiences when they're with somebody else. But I don't really feel much when I get to Cabot. It's like, okay, got to go down to the trailhead. And I now have, after that, like maybe a 7 mile roadblock or something. So instead of finishing off the divertismo with a celebration, I finished it off with a nice little road walk.
All right. Just a quick little 7 mile nothing, just a little
Yeah.
hop, skip, and jump. You probably just did somersaults the whole 7 miles. So that's like nothing. It's child's play for you.
It's actually cartwheels, but yeah.
At this point, that the Catskills must have felt like a lifetime ago.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, for sure.
Just a complete, like you were a different human being back then, let alone decades ago at this point, it must feel like.
Yeah, it was also about this time that I started really thinking this was possible, that I would be able to finish in time, which was a nice little mental switch. What was your
ultimate deadline? I know you finished August 14th. Is that the day that you had to finish by, or what was the complete deadline day?
My return to work date was September 21st. No, sorry. August 21st. Sorry. Months are hard.
I was going to say, you had plenty of time. You could have done it again.
August 21st. Apologies. And I needed at least a day of travel, and it would have been nice to have an extra day of rest. So August 19th probably would have been the absolute latest that I wanted to finish, but that would have been cutting it so close.
Sure. That's like that. That's just like, it has to be done by then, but I'd like it to be done sooner than that. Yeah.
And when I started it, I really wanted to finish by like August 9th or so. I had one of my best friend's weddings was August 12th. And I was really wanted to push to make that, but that was so ambitious. Like, I think I needed to average like 24 to 26 miles a day, every day. And that just, with the injuries, that didn't happen. But they understood, and
don't worry. You'll dedicate a chapter in the book that you're going to write about this to them. About we'll call that portion, the August 12th portion. We'll call it the wedding day, and that'll be your nod to them in the book.
I guess going next up.
We got to get to Maine. You got to get over to Maine.
Hike Cabot. And another thing just to be transparent about is, like, I hiked most of the Appalachian Trail section in Maine, but one part that I did not hike was the Mahoosic Notch, which is known as the hardest mile on the Appalachian Trail. And I decided that because I was not hiking the Appalachian Trail, I was through hiking the 115, I could take a different route.
Hey, that's
especially
smart.
Since I didn't need or want my first time on the Mahoosic Notch to be with a full pack, because I had just resupplied.
No, that's smart.
And
that's smart.
So there was a road that kind of paralleled the trail. It was I think it's Success Pond Road. And it really wasn't that bad of a road walk. It was a dirt road, which is a nice change of pace from other road walking I'd done. Didn't see many cars, saw a bear, which was cool, which I guess brings me to wildlife that I saw. On the hike, I saw 3 bears, a moose, and 43 deer were the notable things.
43 deer. Wow. You had a nice tally going on there.
Yeah. When my mom drove me to the Catskills, we saw so many deer just like jumping in front of the car and on the side of the road. And she was like, well, you need to count the deer on your hike. I was saying, like, oh, okay. Gives me something to do, I guess.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I saw 43 live deer and 3 dead ones on the road walk.
Okay. Classic.
So Success Pond Road gets me to Maine, and there was never a minute that I realized that, like a specific minute that I realized I was in Maine, because there was no line. I didn't know exactly when I crossed over to it, but it felt amazing to get into that area, to be in Maine, or at least near Maine, or I don't know. Yeah. just because from the beginning of the hike, I told myself, once you get to Maine, it's gonna be easy. Everybody does the Appalachian Trail.
Everybody does. Thousands of people do it every year.
Yeah. It wasn't as easy as I expected necessarily, but it was a good section, and it wasn't as bad as some people had told me it was going to be. Is like before I got into Maine, I had people like fear mongering me about how challenging Maine was going to be, how dangerous it was going to be. But it really wasn't that bad.
Dangerous? I mean, come on. You're walking in the woods, people. Dangerous? Come on.
Yeah, they were talking about like the hunting that was about, and then one thing they were right about were the river crossings were dangerous. But that was mostly
this summer. I'll give you that this summer.
Yeah. And they're saying how rugged the terrain is, how rocky it is. I'm like, I've dealt with that before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so getting to Maine, and then after I get to Old Spec, which is the first 4,000 footer in Maine, that's when I am on Appalachian Trail the rest of the hike, other than side trails to get to the 4,000 footers that are not exactly on the Appalachian Trail, but it does a really good job of going near them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when it was. So I talked about how I didn't feel right taking the ferry across Lake Champlain, but I did end up taking the ferry across the Kennebec River, and that was the plan all along. Like I felt much more okay with that because it is the official route of the Appalachian Trail to take that canoe ride across the river. It was like that when they created the trail, and it's like that today. It's like if you told someone that you forded that river, they would be they'd be pissed off at you. Like, you're not supposed to do that. And then it would just, if I wanted to road walk around it, it would have been a ridiculous addition of mileage. And I'm like, this is a hike that I kind of want other people to do in the future as well.
Yeah.
I really want other people to do this in the future. And so I want to try to make it as enjoyable as possible. So why add on those extra miles?
And if that's the official AT, then yeah,
exactly,
I'll allow it.
Yeah.
I will allow it.
Thank you, James. I appreciate your approval.
Yes, that is acceptable for sure.
So I feel no guilt or regret about that.
Nor should you.
Yeah. But that's also when I started. I found what the closest thing that I found to a tramily was a trail family.
Mm-hmm.
A few days, so I guess it started a few days before that. I was at this shelter, and it was Poplar Ridge Shelter, and that was the day that I only did 10 miles. It was supposed to rain horribly that day, and so I had pushed extra miles the day before to give myself a shorter day that day. That's something that I often did on the hike. There's like, if I knew I had a good weather day, and the next day was going to rain, I'd push miles to just make it easier for future Will. And
Smart.
So I got to the shelter, 10 a.m. I'm hanging around all day, just napping. Thankfully, there was a log book in the shelter that had a cool question and answer section in it from a caretaker that had been at the shelter for 60 years. They weren't at the shelter for 60 years, but they caretook the shelter for 60 years. And so it was like a 19-page question and answer, really interesting to read. And I ended up the rest of the hike just like quoting out of that, giving different facts from it for some thru-hikers when it came up in conversation.
Very nice.
But so I'm there, and this guy, Van Gogh, shows up, and we start chatting. And later, his hiking partner, Bagel, shows up. She's soaking wet because the rain finally came. And we just have a good night in the shelter together. And I didn't really expect to see them again because everybody else that I've seen on the trail so far, I see once, and then I basically don't see them again. So it was the pattern, and I was expecting that to continue. And then a few days later, it comes to be the day before my Kennebec crossing. And a little tangent, I gotta get back to where I was. At the shelter, Van Gogh had talked to me about how I should start trying to enjoy parts of the trail and enjoy the experience, because I've just been kind of rushing through things. It's like, just try to enjoy the small things if you can. And so it comes through the day before the Kennebec crossing. I think I will never see Van Gogh or Bagel again. And it's 12:15. I'm a very routine person. And I'm like, okay, this is my lunchtime. That's when I told myself I was going to have lunch, 12:15 on the dot. but there's nothing cool around it. It's not even like a good place to sit. And I know that nearby there's supposed to be a little like beachy spot. And I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have lunch on the beach by the lake? And so I push on and I get to the beach and there's Van Gogh finishing up his lunch right there. I'm like, whoa, this is just wild. Where did you come? How did you get here? He's like, I walked here. I was like, well, yeah, how did you get ahead of me? So we talked about that for a minute and just tried to figure out how they got ahead of me. And he was like, well, by the way, we're crossing the ferry today. We're crossing the Kennebec. Usually the hours for the Kennebec crossing are from 9 to 2. And we were going to get there way after that. And he had said that they had talked to the ferryman and that he would do, apparently the ferryman sometimes does after hours crossings for a fee. Usually it's free to cross during the 9 to 2. But because it's out of his normal hours, he charges a fee for outside of it. Very fair. And so it's like, if you ever have me, I'm in for that. It's like, okay, just be at the river by 4:30. And so I eat the quickest lunch that I've had on this project so far. And I push ahead and I catch up to him and he says, okay, you can go ahead. And if you see this group of 3, their names are Vitamin D, Bambi, and Animal. And I'm like, oh, wait, Animal is big black hair, bushy beard. Like, yeah, have you met him? Like, in my head, I'm like, yeah, unfortunately I have. He's the guy from the GU shelter that talked all night.
Sure. Yes. I remember him. Yes.
And so I push on past Van Gogh because hiking speeds are different and catch up to the other crew. And after that, like, I introduced myself. We crossed the ferry and then I asked if I could crash in their hotel room that night. And after that, like, we were able to, we bonded, and that group was the closest to a tramline that I had on the hike. Like, we didn't necessarily hike the same speed, but we would go the same mileage each day. And so I might get to camp a little before them, but I would still have that community, that social aspect when I was at the shelter or in town. I don't remember how long I was with them for, but it definitely wasn't long enough. It was the best part of my through hike was having their company.
Mm-hmm. And at that point too, since it's the end of the journey, or like, getting to the end of the journey, that's when you need that, for that final push, you need that big boost. So so it came at a great time.
Yeah. I mentioned how river crossings in Maine were dangerous or sketchy, and most of them were pretty manageable. But there was one that was definitely scary, and it's worth touching on because it's a notable story, I think. It's before Monson, so right before the 100-mile wilderness on the Appalachian Trail. And we had heard that the river crossings would be elevated because we just got an inch and a half of rain. But the day after we got the rain, the river crossings we had were pretty minor. Like, you might be wet up to your knee at the most. Nothing bad. So we thought that was what the rest of the river crossings were going to be like, or that's what I thought they were going to be like. But then I get to this one river crossing and I have to double check that the blaze is actually, what I'm looking at is actually a blaze. I'm like, do I actually cross this river? And there's 2 other people then show up and they're like, yeah, we've been scouting out, looking to see if we can find any other way through this or around this, like any better, safer options. And they're like, we can't find anything. I'm like, well, I'm going to give it a go. And I start wading in and it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And I'm a 6'1" individual and it went up to my chest.
Wow.
And it was like moving strong. I used my trekking poles to dig them into the bottom of the river to give me some extra traction. And I just took slow and really focused steps. I was trying to walk like upriver and across to try to counterbalance the river pushing me down a little bit. And there was a short period of like a fraction of a second where I lost control, and it was incredibly scary for that fraction of a second. I caught myself really quick. And yeah, sorry, I'm just like reliving that is not great.
No, it sounds like that would be a scary moment.
And I get across to their side, and there's this southbound hiker that they were much shorter than I am, older than I am woman that was just like, in my head, I was like, I do not want you to cross this river. Like, that was so scary for me. And I can't imagine what it's going to be like for you, someone much shorter than I am. So I was like, what are you thinking? She's like, well, I got to cross this river, I guess. Like, there's no other option. I was like, oh, okay. Like, I'm going to stay here because I'm not going to leave you to this by yourself. I like took off my pack and I threw my hat down, and I was just like ready to like jump in after her if I had to. It probably wouldn't have even been the smartest thing to do, but I think it's like what instinct would have done. She made it across safely, thankfully. She lost control for a little bit longer than I did, but she was able to catch herself and made it across. That was very stress inducing, and it's something that I will never forget, just that entire river crossing.
Mm-hmm. No, it sounds like that was quite the moment. Mm-hmm. And that's the right move. It would have been a terrible move for you to just say, all right, good luck. See you later.
Right? Oh my
gosh, been the worst.
I couldn't imagine. No, and then, so my group of people that I had been hiking around, they had made a big deal about like not crossing rivers by yourself. And I thought that meant like, just make sure there's other people around. But when I get to the Shaw's Hiker Hostel, which we were staying that night, they come up to me and they're like, Flash, that's my trail name. They're like, Flash, did you cross that river without anybody else in it with you? I'm like, yeah, what do you mean? They're like, you're not supposed to cross rivers alone. I'm like, I wasn't alone. There's other people around on the other sides. I'm like, that's not what we meant. You're supposed to like link arms. And they did like a triangle formation to get across, I guess.
Oh,
apparently our definitions of alone were different, and they were not thrilled with me for crossing it with only me in the river, but I made it across.
All right. Well, you made it across in one piece, thankfully. But you should have told them that's how the AT hikers do it. I'm a 115, or we do it differently.
I'm not all about that elitism.
So anyway, so you made it across though, so that's good. So you're nearing the end of the journey here. So
I'm getting to the 100-mile wilderness.
Yeah, which it's exciting.
It's like a big deal. And it's also, I had heard, to be much easier terrain than the rest of Maine, because we totally skipped over, and I think it's totally fine to skip over this because it's pretty mundane at this point for me, at least. Or maybe not for anybody else, but the rest of the 4,000 footers, like, there's nothing too exciting in Maine, like up until Baxter. Maybe I should touch on them a little bit. I just think they're kind of mundane. But let me zoom back on the map. So first off, there's Old Spec, and then sorry, 1 second. Actually, not. What are your thoughts, James? Should I?
Yeah, you can tell whatever points in the story that you think are worth telling to tell the whole story. That's what we want to hear for sure. And if you don't think certain mountains are worth talking about, totally cool. There's no wrong answer. This is a podcast. This is the Wild West. There are no rules.
Since most of them are on the Appalachian Trail, they don't seem very notable to me. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the ones that stuck out a little bit was Reddington. It's the only mountain only 4,000 footer in Maine that doesn't have like an official trail that goes up to it. So it's, no matter what you do, you're gonna be doing a little bushwhack. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to remember. I think I've only previously done that one in the winter. Maybe I did it once in the summer, but I remember the winter time doing it. The bushwhack was horrendous, and so I was kind of dreading it a little bit. But then when I actually get on the bushwhack, it's like almost better condition than the Appalachian Trail. Like, it was a really nice herd path.
Perfect.
And I do remember also that the mountains in Maine, for some reason, I just felt more fatigued going up them. I think it was just at this point in my hike, I had been pushing for so long. And actually also one thing that had happened somewhat earlier on is I had started rationing food a bit more. I had some longer food carries. Mm-hmm. And so say I was carrying 6 days worth of food, but instead of them being 5,000 calorie rations, there were 4,000 calorie rations to save weight and space in my pack. So that might have also led to some of that fatigue, but it was just necessary for where the resupplies were. I think it's also somewhat notable to say that in Maine is where I started staying at some more hostels and inns, whereas I stayed one in New Hampshire, but that was the only one in New York, Vermont, or New Hampshire that I stayed at. And then in Maine, I stayed at I guess I also stayed at the Inn at the Long Trail in Vermont. Apologies for that mistake. I stayed a lot more in Maine, which was a change of pace.
Sure. It's good to switch it up, different vibes for different states, different sections of the trail. That's good that way.
I also think it was necessary just with how, like I mentioned, the fatigue and just having that time in town to be at a restaurant or whatever and eat more. And also I had to go into these hostels to get my resupplies anyway, so might as well stay the night. Yeah, so we got to the 100-mile wilderness. I'm going to skip over most of those mountains because to me they're, I don't know. Apologies to anyone that really wanted to hear about the main 4,000 footers.
Hey, whatever works. You're telling the story. This is your story.
So the first half of the 100-mile wilderness, it's still somewhat hilly, but no 4,000 footers, so it's not that big of a deal. Pack's heavy though, so these mountains still feel challenging. And then I get to the second half, and it's all flat, and that's just wonderful to me. But so to break down 100-mile wilderness, first day I did 20 miles. I really wanted to do more, but I got to the campsite and I waited around a little while for everybody else to show up because I wanted to at least say goodbye to them. And they're like, "Oh, you should stay for just one more night. Let's have one more night together. And also, we don't want these cranky old men that are behind us to come in the shelter. Like, if you're here, then you're going to fill it up the rest of the way." And then we'll full shelter and left to 10. I'm like, "Okay, you convinced me. I'll stay." So that didn't set me up as well as I would have liked to, because at this point, I had my deadline of when I wanted to finish. I knew I wanted to finish August 14th. I had friends staying in Baxter State Park that were going to allow me to stay with them, and they were going to summit with me, and one of them was going to drive me back further, closer to home, or closer to home from Baxter. So I knew after the 20-mile day, I was going to really need to push the miles. And so the next day I did 30 miles, which was, up until then, I believe my only 30s had been on the roads, but these were pretty flat miles. Was that one? That one did actually have a bit of elevation again, I believe. And then after that, I pushed a 37-mile day, which was my longest on the Thru-Hike, but it was it was basically entirely flat. And at that point, I'd eaten a lot of my food, so my pack was lighter. And the reason I pushed that big of a day was the next day was supposed to rain all day again. And I had a nice day for the 37-mile day. So originally I was supposed to finish off with 2:30s to get into Baxter State Park. But I was like, why do 30 miles in the rain if I don't have to? So it was 37 miles on a nice day. And then I think it was like 23 miles or something on what was supposed to be an iffy day. Ended up being fine, which, oh well, it worked out. And I had extra time at the end of the 23-mile day just to relax. But I get to my friend's campsite and I beat them there. They were like out on an excursion or something for the day. So I get there, sit on my tent, and once they show up, they just start feeding me. And I don't stop chewing for like 2 hours, and it's phenomenal.
That's a good night right there.
Yeah. And then that day also was a day that I started really feeling somewhat like emotional, I guess. I was just like, this is actually happening. I've done this. It's over, basically. There's nothing that can stop me right now. And the next day I took my vest over to North Brother. I out and back to the campsite that I was staying at. And then I went to the trailhead for Katahdin, or where the Appalachian Trail goes up to Katahdin. my friends met me there, and we hiked up to Hamlin and then over to Baxter, and that was the finish. I didn't feel that same emotion I felt the day before for some reason.
It was just like, all right, did it.
Yeah. And I guess one thing that I think the highlight of the day of the finish was I had lost Van Gogh and Bagel and the rest of the group a few days before. Van Gogh and Bagel were the ones I first met at the shelter, and they were the ones I spent more time with, I guess. I was close with all of them, but I knew they were planning on finishing on the same day as I was. They had been pushing a few more miles than the other group who planned on finishing a little later. And I asked someone while I was going up towards Katahdin, like, have you seen either of these people? And they're like, yeah, they're just ahead. And so I was not expecting that, honestly. Like, I was hoping it, but I wasn't expecting it. And so I told my friends, like, I'm running ahead. I'm going to go try to find these people, and then I'll wait for you guys to catch up. And I'm able to come across Van Gogh, and it was just, that was so nice to see him again and have all the time to talk that on the final day. Bagel was too far ahead, didn't catch up to her, but oh well.
Very cool. So did you guys finish at the same time then? Did you go up together?
Unfortunately not, because the way that my finish went was I had to, so Katahdin is actually made up of, or maybe it's more sub-peaks than this, but there's two 4,000 footers on what people call Katahdin. There's Hamlin Peak and then Baxter Peak, where like the Katahdin sign is. That's where the Appalachian Trail either starts or finishes, depending on which direction you're going. And I knew I wanted to finish on Baxter Peak. So we had to out and back Hamlin first, so I could then get to Baxter Peak for the finish. And so obviously the Appalachian Trail through hikers don't need to do that, so they head straight for Baxter.
Makes perfect sense. Totally get it.
Yeah.
So unfortunately anticlimactic in the sense of having this big epic finish with him, but also at the same time kind of fitting, given that this was a journey with you, yourself, and Irene in your head. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I did finish with my the friends that had joined me.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Because you ran up ahead, but then they eventually caught up, clearly. Or you went back to them.
Right, yeah, they caught up.
Very nice.
Yeah.
All right. So when you got to the top and you were there, what emotions came over you?
Not many. Like, I don't even know if I felt relief at that point, because I knew I still needed to hike down. I just felt kind of empty, which sounds weird, but it's really how I didn't feel much of anything. And I've been seeking the sense of accomplishment through hiking for a while now, and I haven't really felt it. The closest that I felt came to it was probably the Diartisma, which I mentioned was probably because I did the entire thing with someone else, and that just made it more. Yeah, I think I'm seeking accomplishment in the wrong places.
Well, I mean, it's an absolutely amazing journey, an amazing story that you had. And now, even now, like at Maine, and remember the Catskills days, like talk about now it was, instead of a decade ago, now it feels like probably it was 20 years ago. I mean, what a journey though. I
haven't finished rewatching all my videos that I took. Most nights I would record what I called my tent talks. It was just me talking to my camera or my phone camera or whatever. And it was, I may never share these with people, and that's okay. I might, who knows? Most of them are negative, honestly, because a lot of the hike I was just in a negative mindset, unfortunately. But I watched the first bunch of videos, and I just watched it. And I'm like, that guy's not going to finish his through hike. He's going to quit. And then I'm like, oh wait, he does finish it. Spoiler, it's me. Like he finished it. He gets to Katahdin. But it's just, I watched him and it's like, how did I push through that? I still don't know.
Sure. It's some soul searching to figure out, what it was that allowed you to make it. And it's something to harness, really, because if you think you watch those videos, you're like, there's no way he can make it, but he did.
Yeah.
Cinderella story there. So, as we wrap things up here, what did you learn about yourself on this trip Because I think there's a lot to kind of unpack with what you just said.
As cliche as this part is, it's more about the journey than the destination. Because like when I got to the final summit, I didn't feel much, but I think part of that is because the journey was every single day, every footstep that I took. It wasn't just the finish, and there's so much more to it than that. I also reaffirmed that I enjoy adventures with other people more than alone. I still do think that I'll have many solo adventures, unfortunately, just because a lot of people aren't as crazy as I am and they're not willing to do this silly stuff. But I think I also need to make time or more time to do adventures with other people. And those are, I think, the two main things that I took away from this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also that maybe I shouldn't seek accomplishment in this way. Maybe I should find other ways to feel good about myself.
They don't call this type 2 fun for no reason. I mean, it is type 2 fun. We have fun, but it's not like ha ha yay fun. It's a different type of fun. And anyone who hikes mountains, anyone who puts themselves out there and, for no reason other than like, let's climb a mountain, let's go see the view. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a different type of mindset, and it is exactly type 2 type of fun.
And oftentimes, like, there wasn't a view on these mountains. Like, if it wasn't raining, there was smoke from the wildfires.
Sure, absolutely, a smoky, hazy summer indeed.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so in closing, what is the one let's start with what was the one worst memory of the trip? And it could be something you already talked about. What was like the number one worst part of the trip, worst memory, and what was the best memory?
So those are huge questions.
They are. And there's no wrong answer, but just what's the first things that came to your mind when I said those questions?
The first thing that came to mind was quad pain.
Mm-hmm.
And the times that I literally didn't think that I was going to be able to do this, where I was just crying to myself or crying to my mom. And I just felt so poorly about myself. Like, usually I feel like my body is very capable. I'm a capable hiker. I can do what I set my mind out to do. And those moments where I was having that pain, I just felt weak. I didn't feel good about myself. And that was not a good feeling to have. So the quad pain was the worst part. And particular moments that I remember. Yeah. Okay. So there's the worst.
Mm-hmm. Now hit us with the happy ending now.
I really enjoyed the town stays on the Appalachian Trail with the people that I ended up meeting. At Shaw's Hiker Hostel, there was a sticker on a wall or something, and it said Appalachian Trail, the most fun you'll have in your life, interrupted by long walks in the woods. And that really resonated with me, because all the time, like at camp or in towns with these people, was wonderful. And then you had to go out there and walk all day long.
Sure.
And like, I love hiking, but my favorite part of hiking turns out to be not hiking.
Yeah.
Which is like the camping aspect of it.
No, dude, I can totally relate to that sentiment. I was in a band for a long time, and I mean, most of my not even most, all of my memories from the years I was touring in a band are from the times in the van with the guys. I don't remember any shows. And it's like, that's why you're out there. It's like to play shows and meet kids and like just have a good time. But like all of the memories that we talk about, they're never about, hey, remember this show or that show? It's always like stuff that happened in the van. And then, it's like, that resonates really strongly with me. Those are the good times, and those are the times we remember.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right.
I thought of I have one more thing.
Yes, please.
I thought of another thing that I kind of took away from this project.
Hit me.
And it was that I have way more support in my life than I thought I did. There was just people coming out of the woodwork wanting to help me. And I unfortunately wasn't able to talk about them all tonight, and that, like, hopefully that's okay with them. But just the people that helped me out, they know who they are, and thank you to them.
Yeah, it's good to have that support system, especially when we do these crazy, silly things that nobody has to help you with. They're not obligated. They just want to see you succeed. And those are quality people to keep in your circle and keep around. Very cool. So, Will, this was awesome. It was great hearing this story. It's absolutely wild what you did. You should feel accomplished. I know you kind of have these weird feelings and this weird, like, kind of emptiness about it, but I have a feeling that, you know, through some time that you will start to realize what it did. And I think you'll probably start to hear from a lot of other people about how incredible of a journey it was. So thank you for sharing it on the podcast. It's been fun. Now, where can people find you online?
I'm on Instagram, Wills_wanderings. And that's about it. I don't have much of a social media presence.
And what's next for you? Do you have any future things you're eyeballing, future adventures?
Yeah, so they're mostly 115 focused because I'm obsessed, apparently. I have dreamed up this project called, I'm calling the 115 Grand Slam. So Grand Slam being 4 parts. One of them was the 115 Thru-Hike. One of them is doing all of the single seasons of the 115. One of them is a speed effort of the 115, which in my mind, doesn't necessarily need to be a Thru-Hike, an FKT of the 115, but it could be, in my opinion, anything under 30 days would be a speed effort. It's pretty quick.
Sure.
I've talked to people who think it could be done much faster than that, but for me, 30 days would be good. And then a lifelong goal, which is something I really need. I find that if I don't have a goal, I'm not motivated to get out there, and I just kind of turn into a blob, and it's not good for my mental health not to get out there. So I need a goal. And so, are you familiar with what a grid is when it comes to a hiking list?
Oh yeah, very much so.
Okay. So working towards the 115 grid would be the 4th part of it, which is, I don't want to make anybody, it's definitely a lifelong thing. I'm not going to, I'm not even near close to, I shouldn't even been thinking about it, but it's my goal.
But it's in the back of your head, and that's how these things happen.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Will, thank you so much. And that's going to wrap up this 2-part episode here on the 46 of 46 podcast. It was great hearing this amazing story from Mr. Will Robison about his Northeast 115 Thru-Hike, starting in the Catskills, down to the ADK, I should say up to the ADK, over to Vermont, over to New Hampshire, and ending in Maine. What a fantastic story. Thank you all for listening to the 46 of 46 podcast summit sessions. It was great leaving the blue line for this magnificent story. It was fantastic. A story of somebody pushing themselves, having constantly things going wrong, and keeping their head in the game and pushing forward 1 foot at a time. And it got him all the way to Maine. Amazing story. Thank you all for listening. Check out 46of46.com. I have a lot of things I offer there, from an ebook guide if you're about to hike the 46 high peaks, to a guide service, and lots of other stuff. That's at 46of46.com. Find me on social media at 46of46 podcast. And if you like the show, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen. I would greatly appreciate it. Check back on Fridays for new mountains, new stories, new guests, and new episodes here on the 46 of 46 podcast. And remember to always leave no trace, do the rock walk, and if you carry it in, carry it out. See you on the trails, everybody.